books, videos, forums, and you're back where you started. You're not really sure what it is, how it works, and how to use the Zettelkasten method. The confusion is huge, and the initial reason is the definition. Like, if you don't know exactly what this method is, you won't be able to decide if it suits you or not, how to use it and how not. So let's explain it in detail and put an end to all this mess. The Zettelkasten method is a system that fosters part of the learning process through note-taking in a specific way. This is my personal definition, which will clash with the opinion of the majority, as it breaks with the following two beliefs. One, believing that it is only a note-taking system. Although it includes a note-taking system, this actually forms part of a larger system, which consists of a series of steps or general guidelines that accompany the learning process. The results you obtain will be useless if you only use the note-taking system. Two, believing that the Zettelkasten method is a learning system. The method is not a complete learning system on its own. Recalling the definition from the beginning, it is a system that fosters the learning process, meaning that by correctly applying the method in its entirety, we will be participating in the learning process, specifically the beginning, but not necessarily finishing it. So, while it is useful, it is incomplete. Also, it is neither useful for everything nor for everyone, as we will see later on. Now that we have a clear definition, we can move on to explain the heart of the method is note-taking system. The note-taking system consists of two steps. The first is about writing the notes, but to harness the true potential of the method, the notes must meet the following three characteristics. First characteristic, one note per idea. This means that each note must store the information of a concept, thought, reflection, and so on. In essence, a note should talk about only one thing. Second characteristic, be concise. This does not only mean being as brief as possible, but also being clear and getting straight to the point. The note can be longer, there's no problem with that. The important thing is to use the right and necessary words. Third characteristic, it must be decontextualized. This means you must write the note in such a way that the written information can work in different situations and for different topics. Interconnecting the notes is the next step. It consists of writing in the note the name of the note or notes to which your new note could relate. In other words, notes that contain relevant information. It can be of any type, such as complementary information, contradictory information, information that reinforces the previous one, and so on. It is also advisable to add a title to each note, number it, and use that number to make the connection. Very interesting, but wouldn't it be simpler to just add that note to the topic it belongs to? Besides, why would I want to decontextualize the note if that information is supposed to belong to a specific topic? The way of taking notes described seems like a disadvantage, but it is precisely here where the potential of this method lies. By decontextualizing the information, you exponentially increase the usefulness of that note because it will not lose its value for the context topic to which it initially belongs. Also, it will have the potential to belong to another topic. Now, it can be useful to you under different circumstances in other contexts. This way, you no longer have to organize your notes under topics and subtopics. All notes will be stored in the same place, and the topics will emerge from the connections between notes that you make. You'll only need to review one note that works as a starting point and follow all the connections to other notes that were created over time. All the notes you find will be the notes that belong to that topic. That's why it's so important to create at least one connection for every note you add. As you learn more, add notes, and create connections, the entire system will become more valuable. Not just because of the sheer number of notes, but also because it will allow you to discover knowledge without adding anything new. How? Let's look at the following example. Imagine you add note number 200 and connect it to note 50. So far, nothing special, but it turns out that in the past, when you added note 50, you connected it to note 30 at that time. And this means that note 200 is also connected to note 30. Therefore, the information from both notes is mutually relevant, and this happened indirectly thanks to the system. This is the potential it has, because when you added this last note, you might not have even thought that the previous note could be related. This is a very basic example with only 3 notes. Now imagine if you had a chain of 50 connected notes, or even more, and each one had another chain of 50 connected notes, and each one had even more connections. This would create relationships between information that you might never have imagined. Because the system itself is only about creating notes and interconnecting them, the value and potential described can only be achieved if the notes are written correctly, meeting the previously mentioned characteristics. That's why I mentioned that using only the note-taking system is useless. The way to solve it is by using the complete method, which consists of consciously writing the notes, fulfilling the mentioned characteristics. By doing so, what we will achieve is truly understanding everything we are going to put in a note before even writing it, thus moving from merely knowing and/or storing information to transforming it into true knowledge. But this only helps us start the learning process. The complete learning process consists in not only of transforming information into knowledge, but also of making it useful, using that knowledge. So if we don't make use of the knowledge, it's not really learning. To conclude the learning process by using the knowledge, the method tells us that exactly nothing. The method by itself does not have an active way of using the acquired knowledge, which is why I mentioned at the beginning that it is incomplete. Don't get confused. The fact that the method is incomplete is not a bad thing and doesn't take away from its value, but keep in mind that if you take notes, it's because you want to give them a later use. To complete the Zettelkasten method and be able to use it as a complete learning method, you must know the reason why you take notes in order to define the objective. The reason starts with knowing if you really need to take notes. I mean, note-taking is not an indispensable requirement for learning, it's just another tool. Also, you don't always want to use this tool to learn something. You don't need to take notes to learn how to play soccer or any other sport, nor to learn how to lift weights correctly. The situations in which you need to take notes arise naturally, although there are situations where it's not very clear whether it's necessary or not. One example could be learning how to use an app or learning to play an instrument. These are unclear situations, and the answer will depend entirely on your judgment. That's why it's first necessary to establish a reason. If there really is no reason to take notes, then don't do it. If you're sure you need to take notes, it's time to know how. In this case, the Zettelkasten method is one way, but don't be fooled by how disruptive it is. Remember that the result it gives us is a mass of knowledge structured in a specific way, and that structure may not serve at all for your objective in note-taking. So, depending on that objective, which is the final use of the notes, the purpose, you will need to choose the correct method. If you only want notes to store things like handbooks, where you write a step-by-step of how to do something, for example, a recipe, or how to activate a function in an app, then definitely this method is not what you need. There are many use cases for the Zettelkasten method, the most famous being non-fiction writing and academic research, as explained in the most famous book about this method called How to Take Smart Notes. Many recommend this book. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it unless you want to use it for those two fields, mainly for academic research. It's true that the book presents very interesting ideas, but it must be taken with great care. It has dangerous ideas, and if you apply them to something outside the book's goal, it might all end in disaster. Because of that, I've done a deep analysis, chapter by chapter, extracting the key learnings, but also adding explanations for missing or unclear information, in addition to warning you about things you should be careful with and giving my opinion on aspects I don't agree with, and so on. If you would like to know that, or if you're not passionate about reading, or don't have the time, or don't want to waste time reading a book that you don't know if it's worth it, or even just want to get the direct teachings without having to read the whole book, I invite you to check out my newsletter on Substack. There, I will also be answering any pending questions I didn't cover in this video. The link is in the description, and in the pinned comment. I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments. Thanks for watching.